We're finally getting caught up, and Spider-Man's son, right, Venom, puts the fear of God in the Kingpin. Now, here's the cool thing about this, right? This picks up after the last video that we did, where basically he had been tricked into a meeting with the Kingpin, not realizing what was going on. One part of that is because he's just kind of in love with Felicia Hardy, or as in love as he can be. The other part of that is because when Richard Parker got the Picotech suit that was originally given to Peter Parker by Tony Stark, which Peter effectively cast aside in favor of his traditional spandex suit, that Richard wanted to be a superhero, but he doesn't really understand what that means. And he certainly doesn't understand how deep and how twisted the world can be as it was made by the maker. Because Kingpin, much like the main Marvel universe, is every bit as cold and ruthless as you would expect him to be. And so that's why he tells Richard, so what is it going to be? The pain and suffering of betraying your fellow heroes, or just plain old pain and suffering? I'm fine with whichever way you want to go. And Richard doesn't know how to react here, right? Fear starts to set in. Reality starts to set in. And that's where the Venom suit takes over. And it just tells him, I can take things over if you want me to. Do you want me to do that? And Richard says yes. And that's where things get dope, because Venom says, close your eyes, son, and do not open them until I tell you to. And at that point, he manifests, and it looks amazing. It looks so phenomenal. And here's the cool thing about this, right? Whenever you think of Venom, you think of just like this brutal murder machine in a lot of ways. Just cold, calculating, ruthless, maddening, just destroying everything in its path. And while Venom over the years in the main Marvel universe has had his evolution and he's changed and kind of become a good guy, there's still something to be said about the good old-fashioned David Michelinie Venom Lethal Protector era of Marvel Comics. And that's what Jonathan Hickman is drawing on. Just the absolute insanity of the old school Venom story. So much so that all the bullseye henchmen of the Kingpin, every single one of these guys, are massacred. And when I say massacred, I mean torn apart, right? The whole 9 yards. And even Kingpin is looking at this and is like, what are you, right? He's never seen anything like this before. And I would say nobody on this earth probably has. But here's one of the things to keep in mind about all of this. This is still a tech suit. It's not a traditional organic symbiote that we're used to. But at the end of the day, it makes no difference, because while all these people are being massacred, and even Felicia Hardy's father is on the verge of being destroyed after having been pushed off a building, losing the use of his legs, that Venom goes in for the kill. And then in that moment, Richard takes over and he just says, I'm sorry we scared you. For the first time, Felicia is actually seeing what Richard is about. And that's where she starts to realize she was in over her head, that she didn't realize what was going on with Venom, especially watching her father being destroyed like that. And so what it does is it switches over to Wilson Fisk conversing with everybody else here. Now, it's important to specify Felicia Hardy's father is not dead, although I imagine after seeing something as horrific as Venom, he probably wishes he was. But what's really interesting about this is that Wilson Fisk just says, it's been months, right? Where is he? And so in response to this, Mr. Negative chimes in and he says, I can tell you that Kraven has not left our territories by any of the means that we normally use. I've also been to both his estate and preserve and questioned everyone there. I was thorough in the only way that I can be. No one on his staff knows where he is, but everyone is concerned. He's never disappeared like this before, and they assume the worst. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. If you're not really keeping up with Spider-Man, the whole idea behind Kingpin is that this is effectively the Sinister Six, minus Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter kidnapped Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and Harry Osborn. And initially, he was getting the upper hand. It wasn't until Moleman stepped in alongside Mysterio and basically took out Kraven the Hunter. And so at this point in time, no one really knows what's going on with Kraven. Moleman's not telling, but more so than any of that, Where Kingpin believes he's surrounded by subordinates, the reality here is he's surrounded by people who are either looking to kill him or at the very least, get out from under his rule. So he doesn't really have control over anything. He just believes he does. And that's one of the greatest things about Kingpin and the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. For a guy who just prides himself on always having his thumb on everybody around him, he has his thumb on nothing. He has his thumb on a ruse. And so that's why Moleman says, there are plenty of ways to slip through our fingers unnoticed. Maybe he got tired of all of this. Maybe he decided to hole up in some peaceful corner of the world and watch the sunrise. And then in turn, Wilson Fisk turns to Wesley, right? His personal assistant, basically. And Wesley just says, nothing on my end either. And not to make matters worse, but perhaps it's time to consider our worst case scenario. And when Wilson Fisk is like, do you think he's dead? The response of Wesley, no. Worst case is he's working with Mysterio. Now again, this is one of those cool elements here, because Mysterio is not just one guy. Technically, it seemed to have started with Quentin Beck, but Mysterio is a bunch of people. It's essentially an inner council, a small council. Gwen Stacy is one of the Mysterios, but so is Wesley. So again, Wesley actively working against Kingpin. I love that element of this whole story. And so again, Mr. Negative chimes back in. He says, I would think the worst case is much worse than that. Namely, so could one of us, seeding these fears and seeding these doubts. And so Kingpin asks, right, is this a guess or is it something more? And the response of Mr. Negative, take it however you want, right? But no one at this table has suffered more at the hands of our traitorous ex-colleague than me. Mysterio and his confederates have destroyed 2 more of my warehouses while you all conveniently remain untouched. Perhaps the best course of action on this front is for me to take control of each of you, peek under the hood, just so I can be sure. Now, Mr. Negative's ability to dominate the wills of others is not universal, right? He's very similar to the Purple Man in the sense that those individuals who have a strong enough will can overcome his abilities. But here's the funny thing about this is that Kingpin is like, you wouldn't dare. And he says, even if you did, we both know you are not powerful enough to dominate my will. But the response of Mr. Negative, that was years ago, and I have grown stronger over the years. And that's where Kingpin actually just kind of folds, right? He's like, okay, then look at what they've done to us, right? Because this is no world for justice or heroes. I have become obsessed with mystery instead of adversary. You are right. We will deal with Kraven when we learn more. Until then, we have true enemies to crush. And that's where Felicia's father asked the question, what about the monster, right? I mean, this guy's literally hooked up to all kinds of tubes and stuff. He didn't really make it out of it in one piece. And so Mr. Negative doesn't even know about that. He doesn't know the whole thing about Venom. That's why he's like, I mean, what is this guy talking about, right? The response of Kingpin, Mr. Hardy and I laid a trap with what I now suspect to be the begrudging assistance of his daughter. I was hoping it would be Spider-Man. Instead, it was a nightmare. And while I suppose personal desires and divided loyalties are something that we're going to have to deal with regarding the younger generation, young Felicia will remain at arm's length for a while. She did swear that it was not Spider-Man and that she does not know his real name or that he would transform into a beast. But her father thinks she may be lying. I've stayed out of it for now, but soon enough, I will have a name one way or another. And that's where Moleman's like, and what are you going to do when you get it? And the response of Kingpin, kill him. Because keep in mind, Kingpin does not know the identity of Spider-Man as Peter Parker. And so while all this is going on, because of the actions of Wesley operating as a spy and as a member of the Mysterio group, while Gwen Stacy does currently have the Mysterio amulet, meaning she's the one that takes on the physical appearance of Mysterio, Wesley basically allows them to listen in on the entire conversation. And that's seemingly why Kingpin is losing at every turn, because he has no clue that everyone is spying on him. And that's when you switch back over to Moleman and the apartment of Spider-Man, because this place is every bit as trashed as you would expect it to be. One of the things to keep in mind is that when Spider-Man and Harry Osborn had been kidnapped by Kraven the Hunter, that ultimately their home was turned into a kind of monitoring space by Dr. Octopus, Otto Octavius, who actually treated it as his own place. And he trashed it, right? I mean, this guy, pizza boxes all over the place. Guy's living like he's in a frat house, right? He's like Asmund Raven Gold's place. And so because of that, Spider-Man chimes in every once in a while to see whether or not anybody is foolish enough to break into this place. And lo and behold, here comes the Moleman. Now, the conversation between the two is really interesting because what Jonathan Hickman seems to be hitting at here is that at some point along the line, Spider-Man might kill. And that's what's kind of nuts, is because in this conversation, right, Spider-Man initially kind of greets Moleman by just saying, I come here to visit every so often, hoping somebody shows up. And then what do you know? The time that I actually happen to be here to check on this device, someone shows up, right? And so that's where Moleman says, right, it's amusing that you think that your family is ever going to be able to live here again, Peter Parker, when Peter's talking about, having to explain the hole in the wall to MJ and all that kind of stuff. And that's where Peter asks, like, what are you talking about? And the response of Moleman, it means they're coming for you. They do not know who you are yet. And because I am complicit, I've kept what I know secret for now. But believe me, it's just a matter of time until they do. So I wanted to warn you, right? Because Moleman knows the identity of Spider-Man. But even Peter is just kind of like flabbergasted here, right? Moleman is a member of Kingpin's Sinister Six. Moleman has no reason to lend aid to Peter Parker. It makes no sense that he would do any of that. And even Peter's a little suspicious, right? Is this some kind of double agent act? Is he trying to gain the confidence of Peter Parker so he can betray him and destroy him at a future point in time by handing him over to Kingpin? There's a lot of suspicious stuff, right? And so Peter even goes so far as to say that, I do not get this, right? I don't understand why you helped us in the jungle or why you'd want to help me now. And how on earth did you come through the wall? We're not even on the bottom floor, right? And that's where Moleman's like, that's just how my powers work. And to answer the more important question, let's just say that I do not care for who I've been associated with over the years, and I've been looking for a way out. Now, I think I've found someone and something powerful enough to end this for good. And Peter starts to pick up on what the Moleman is putting down, which is to say, Peter, I think you are the guy who can put down the Kingpin. And that's where Peter says, you have the wrong guy, right? You need to understand there are lines that I won't cross, things that I won't do. And the response of the Moleman, and your friends feel the same way because I saw what you went through, and that changes a person. Now, here's what he's talking about here, right? The reality is that in this new Ultimate Universe that was kind of founded, right, the groundwork laid by Jonathan Hickman and has been consistently contributed to by some of the greatest writers in modern comic books, that you have this universe where things are very dark and very, very bleak. More so than that, it's a universe that presents itself as a place where guys like Peter Parker do not have the luxury of being able to draw lines in the sand and being able to say, well, that's a line that I'm just not going to cross. In the main Marvel universe, they do it all the time. But in this reality, his hand could very well be forced. And in fact, it almost was, right? That there was a moment when Peter almost killed Kraven the Hunter. He was so close to doing it, you could almost taste it. And if anything, that's probably a teaser from Jonathan Hickman indicating that Peter may very well go over the edge at some point in time. Because lest we forget, the Maker is still emerging from that entire city. So who knows what happens when that takes place. But Peter, in looking at all of this, just says, I think you should leave. And that's where the Moleman just says, remember, the offer stands. I can help you. And so this is an important thing here because Peter is falling into a dark place based on the torture he experienced from Kraven. And so at that point, you switch back over to Richard, who just gets back home. And Richard was not supposed to be out because he was grounded. So not only did Richard sneak out, he manifested the Venom symbiote, found himself in some great big huge scenario with a Kingpin in over his head. As you guys can imagine, his parents are pissed. Peter and MJ are mad as hell. So much so that, like, MJ starts freaking out. She says, Richard Parker, right? So first and last name obviously means you're in trouble. And she's like, I don't even know what to say to you right now. And then she says, actually, I know exactly what I want to say. If you think being grounded comes with some kind of selective participation, then maybe I need to grab your biggest book and beat you half to death with it. And if you think for 1 second that suit can protect you from me, you are wrong. Because if the Venom symbiote understands anything, it's not not to stand in the way of a pissed off mom. And that's where it tells Richard, like, I told you that was a bad idea. And then Richard, responding to the Venom symbiote, says, shut up. And at that moment, MJ thinks he's talking to her. She's like, what did you just say to me? Right? And Peter's just kind of like, I think we should all kind of calm down. And the response of MJ, I don't care. Right? Like, she's just getting more and more pissed off because not only did Richard sneak out of the house when he was grounded, now it sounds like he's giving her lip. Right? So it's just one of these things where she's just getting angrier and angrier. So Peter ultimately kind of diffuses the situation. It's like, okay, look, let's just all kind of calm down. MJ, we'll take a minute. Richard, you stay here. Symbiote, do not let him leave. And Peter like webs him up, right? So that he can't actually go anywhere. And then after having to deal with, MJ's mom and all that kind of stuff, you finally get this moment that so many people who have been reading Ultimate Spider-Man have been waiting for, right? One of the biggest criticisms that I've seen online with the Ultimate Spider-Man comic so far is that Gwen Stacy is Mysterio, Peter Parker is Spider-Man, Harry Osborn is the Green Goblin, Uncle Ben and J. Jonah Jameson are running their own newspaper where they're exposing the truth out there to the world. Everybody has a proactive role in this comic book doing something to combat the forces of evil in some capacity, except for Mary Jane Watson. She's just there. And like Peter talks to her sometimes, but now we're kind of getting that shift because what happens is there's this phenomenal conversation between the two of them because she says, I feel like I've taken all this pretty well, everything that's been going on, that I've been a pretty good mom and a pretty good wife. And the response of Peter, like, you're an amazing wife and you're an even better mom. But that's where MJ just says, when you first started out, I forgave you for keeping it from me. I knew you were going through something, and if I was patient, you'd let me know when you were ready. But when you and Harry were kidnapped, I took care of the kids and did my best to remain calm, even though I was anything but. And when you said it was time to run, I ran as hard as I could. But this stuff with Richard, I thought it might be fun for the two of you to help you guys grow closer, for you to grow closer to him. And maybe that's how it started. But Peter, this suit is dangerous. And Peter kind of cuts her off and is like, look, I mean, he's safer in that suit than you are walking across the street, which is an adequate statement, right? The Venom symbiote or the Picotech suit, however you want to refer to it, would willingly destroy itself in order to keep Richard Parker safe. That's what it was told to do by Peter. It's its number one priority. But even Peter says, it doesn't mean that I like it, right? It doesn't mean that I'm not also terrified when he puts it on. But for the time being, after what he's backed into, I want him sleeping in that thing. And that's where MJ's like, and what about May and me? Right? What about the two of us? Right? What about your daughter and your wife and my whole family who might be dragged into this by hiding out here? What about Uncle Ben? What about everyone? And that's where Peter's like, what about everybody? Right? We're all trapped in this city with these maniacs in charge. It's why they have to be stopped. It's why this has to end. We have a plan. And that's what's so ironic about everything that Peter is saying, right? In relationships, you have what are called bids, right? Your partner looks out the window and says, man, that's a pretty bird. That's a bid. She wants you to acknowledge the fact that the bird exists. And that's what MJ's doing here. She's trying to bridge a connection between her husband by expressing the fact that Peter keeps using a lot of I statements, right? I and we, meaning basically everybody but her, which in effect he's telling her, sit down, chill, relax, right? You will be safe. But the reality here is that MJ does not want to be kept. She doesn't want to be put in some kind of a glass jar and told everything's going to be cool. We'll get to you once everything is sorted out. She feels helpless, and she's feeling helpless because she's being made to feel helpless because she asked the question, you trust them, right? Harry and Gwen. And he says, I trust Harry and Harry trusts Gwen. And MJ just says, Peter, I don't know how much more of this I can take. And so the response of Peter, then tell me what you need me to do, right? Anything, like whatever it is, tell me what you need me to do. And the response of MJ, I don't want to ask anymore. And Peter's like, what are you talking about? And she says, I know that you've answered every question that I've had, but I don't want to have to do that anymore. I want you to tell me everything that I need to know about you, Harry, and Gwen, everything that you've been up to. No more lies by omission, no more secrets. And that's where Peter's like, are you really sure that you want to know? Because this could be one of those situations where you get everything you're asking for, but nothing that you want. And the response of MJ, I am absolutely sure. Tell me everything. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Finally, MJ's getting some development in the Spider-Man comic. I love Hickman, but Jesus, it took 19 issues. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.